І ми зараз вітаємо в студії нашого співведучого, співведучого нашого вітаємо, пана Ілька Божка, капітана Збройних сил України, який буде спілкуватися з нашою колегою з компанії CBS News. Дебора Патта і Ілько Божко.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi there.
I just need to say a few words in Ukrainian to switch. Дякую всім. Пані Дебора Патта зробила дуже важливу справу. Вона зробила один з найпроникливіших епізодів з Ізюму. Я розкажу вам про це і про свої враження. Я був до того, як викрилося про масові поховання там. Я був під час цього, я був після цього. Це щось неймовірне. І я думаю, що дуже важливо побачити і почути це від людини, яка приїхала ззовні і має свій набір досвіду стосовно таких речей. And I'm back, Deborah. Thank you very much for your waiting. Truly appreciate you joining us. Hello. I just explained briefly that I've been there as well. I'm talking about your amazing episode from Ізюм. So I've been there before, just after liberation. I've been there during the exhumation process. This, I don't know how to describe it, and you need to help me. I need you. What's happened before? How did you decide to come, and what conclusion did you get after Ізюм?
I think, one of the most, I apologize for the darkness. Can you believe it? I live in South Africa and we have a power crisis, so we don't have enough electricity at the moment. But this country is not at war. And I'm always telling people they have better power in Ukraine, even though the country's at war. I live in Africa and I've covered many conflicts in the past. And I think for me, covering Ukraine and specifically the Ізюм story that you're talking about, and that was shortly after liberation, after Kharkiv had been liberated in the offensive last year, around September, was that one of the most remarkable things about this war, and perhaps one of the most heartbreaking, is that we are seeing war crimes in real time. As journalists, we get to cover conflicts around the world, many terrible conflicts. And this is not the first human rights atrocity that I have personally witnessed and have had the sadness to cover. But I think what is unique about this is that usually we arrive long after it's happened. And often we go to countries where the leaders don't want us to go and see the terrible things that are happening. But the thing about Ukraine, because it's a democracy and because it's a country that's been invaded, is that as journalists, as the media, we are able to cover fairly freely what is happening a lot of the time. And so we get to see in real time war crimes that are being committed. I think this is possibly one of the first wars in the history of humankind where war crimes are being documented in real time. And I had witnessed the atrocities in Bucha, and I thought things couldn't get worse than that. And then I went to Ізюм. And the sight of this pine forest, which would normally be a place where people would go to spend a beautiful afternoon or evening in nature, this pine forest that had been turned into a cemetery, rows upon rows of graves. And in each of those shallow, mostly unmarked graves, because these people had not even been given dignity in death, row upon row of unmarked graves. In each of those graves was the body of a person who had lived in Ізюм or around Ізюм. A person who had loved, who had a family, who had laughed, who had dreams and hopes for the future. And for me, that is, I think, why I like and want to cover war. I don't like covering war, but when I cover war, I want to tell the stories of people, because we forget when we talk about weapons and we talk about numbers and how many troops and what is happening here and the big artillery that's being used. Very important. But what the most important thing to remember about war is that it is about people. And there are people who are dying on a regular daily basis. And Ізюм, you couldn't deny that fact. There was over 400 unmarked graves of people who had been killed during the occupation by Russia. And Russian soldiers had taken these bodies and dumped them unceremoniously in this pine forest. And we spoke to a man who told us that he'd been tortured and he was terrified that one day, he might have ended up in a grave just like that. And the thing about that man, Anatoly, his story, was that it wasn't unique. It was over and over again. We kept hearing these stories. There was a systematic pattern of torture. There was a systematic means of disposing of bodies. Because frankly, the people who did that, I think they thought they would never get caught. And that for me is one of the most profound things about covering this war, is that we are seeing war crimes being committed in real time, and those crimes are being documented, and one day will get prosecuted.
It's very interesting. It's different point of view, like this is why it's so interesting, and in connection with that, what can you tell to the people who say that their abilities here to cover some events are limited? To the journalists who say no, you don't have freedom of speech, who say no, you don't have good enough ethical code here, what to follow. So what can you say for these people?
I think, for me, I haven't personally experienced that. I mean, obviously in war, there's always a fog. A lot of things, governments don't want to let out, and Ukraine is no different. They don't want to tell you numbers of dead and that, but that is common in any country, in any war that I have covered. I think that when we are able to get to the front line, nobody is saying, you've got to say this, you can't say that. We are free to report exactly what we're seeing. There is definitely been absolutely no suppression on anything that I personally have witnessed and been able to report. We work for CBS. We have a very high ethical code in which our job is to portray and try and uncover the truth, to get behind the official facade, to get behind the numbers, and to shine a light on the suffering that people are experiencing. And that's what I keep coming back to, is that is our job, is to show the suffering, to show people what war really means. And I have been able to do that very freely in Ukraine. Sometimes it is difficult to get to areas, and you have to jump through all sorts of hoops, but there's certainly no suppression of the freedom of speech. And I think that is something, again, that is very unique about Ukraine, is that as journalists, we have been able to move around the country and show the world what is happening and shine a light on the brutality that is being committed in your country. And it's hard not to come to Ukraine and feel so deeply moved by not only the horrors that we have witnessed as journalists and for you as people living it on a daily basis. We're lucky, we get to leave. I come home here to South Africa, to the dark, but I still come home. You stay in it every single day. We get to see that, but what we also get to see is remarkable bravery. And I'm inspired every time I come to your country at how people open their hearts, they talk to us freely and tell us their stories and allow us to tell their stories, because as journalists, it's a privilege to tell other people's stories. They are trusting us with that information. And our job is to present that accurately and show the world what is really happening.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It was really interesting. I hope to see you. When will you come to Ukraine next time? When do you plan to do it?
I'll be there in a couple of months. And
You are
I
very
hope to pay
invited.
another visit to Kharkiv, because it's one of my favorite places in Ukraine.
You're very invited. See you soon. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.